So there's a new report that just came out on billionaire wealth gains during the pandemic, and it's even worse than the previous numbers that we saw. So this is from the Institute for Policy Studies. U.S. billionaire wealth surged by 70%, or $2.1 trillion during the pandemic. They're now worth a combined $5 trillion. And then the subheadline there, Senator Wyden's billionaire income tax tapping those huge returns could raise big revenue to fund President Biden's Build Back Better investment plan. America's billionaires have grown 2.1 trillion richer during the pandemic, their collective fortune skyrocketing by 70%. So it was just short of 3 trillion at the start of the COVID crisis on March 18th, 2020. Now it's over 5 trillion on October 15th of this year. So this is from Forbes data analyzed by Americans for Tax Fairness and the Institute for Policy Studies program on Inequality. Not only did the wealth of U.S. billionaires grow, but so did their numbers. So in March of last year, there were 614 billionaires with 10-figure bank accounts. This October, 745. The $5 trillion in wealth now held by 745 billionaires is 2/3 more than the $3 trillion in wealth held by the bottom 50% of U.S. households estimated by the Federal Reserve Board. That is quite a fact. That is quite a fact. Let me repeat that. $5 trillion in wealth now held by 745 billionaires is 2/3 more than the $3 trillion in wealth held by the bottom half of the country. Jesus Christ. Okay. Some more information. At the same time that billionaires were getting 70% wealthier during this pandemic, 89 million Americans have lost jobs. 89 million. Over 44.9 million were sickened with the virus, and of course over 724,000 have died of the virus. And then there was a report recently from ProPublica on the tax situation with these billionaires, and it was incredibly illuminating. So billionaires have paid no federal income taxes in some recent years, and that includes Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, Michael Bloomberg, and George Soros. The country's top 25 billionaires paid a tax rate of just 3.4% on $400 billion increases in their collective fortune between 2014 and 2018. So do you understand how that works? They're not taking in annual salaries, so they're not making income. If you make income, you can get taxed. Let's say they make $400,000 or more per year, or let's say a surgeon makes $400,000 a year. That person is taxed at about 37%. That's the top marginal rate. So if you're a surgeon and you work insane hours and you have an incredibly stressful job, you make $400,000, but you pay 37%. Because that's the federal marginal income tax rate. But you have some billionaires who pay absolutely nothing, and again, the average was 3.4% on $400 billion in an increase in their wealth. Why? Because they don't take money as an income. They don't do that. They actually, the way they describe it in the article, they do something very interesting in that it's a disgusting loophole. They can let their money sit there, not take any money out, and then they just borrow from a bank and live off the money that they borrowed from the bank. And then eventually, when they do cash out, they cash out and it's the capital gains rate. So it's money that you make through investments, which is taxed at a lower rate. I believe it's about 20%. So you don't pay any taxes. You let the money sit there because you don't take any income. And when you finally decide, I want to cash out, you pay the 20% capital gains rate. So a one-time 20% charge versus yearly 37% for somebody who makes way less, $400,000 a year. So the way the system works, it is completely and utterly rigged in favor of billionaires and against working people. So it's very possible if you're a construction worker, if you're an accountant, if you work a regular job, you pay a higher federal tax rate than people who are sitting on $10 billion, $20 billion, $100 billion. And the data shows that's exactly what's happening. And it's all perfectly legal. It's all perfectly legal because there are giant loopholes in the way the system works. And the loopholes are there on purpose to serve the well-to-do. So think about that. For the first time in our history, and this article came out about 2 years ago, somebody in the working class is paying a higher tax rate than billionaires. And this is all at the same time they saw a 70% increase in their wealth. $2.1 trillion added to their wealth over the course of the pandemic. So it's more concentrated wealth inequality where a tiny fraction has more than regular folks. This is totally unsustainable, guys. Now, they talk about Ron Wyden's billionaire tax. Another way you can address this is a wealth tax. So instead of taxing income, which, like I just described to you, that's what you get per year, what you take out per year, instead of taxing income, you tax their actual net worth. So like all their assets, what they're worth. And if you do that, you raise way more money. And, what you should do is basically mix a wealth tax and the alternative minimum tax. The alternative minimum tax was this tax that you can people who are really wealthy can only deduct to a certain point. So I forgot what the number was. It was either 15 or 20%, but like you can only deduct up to 20%, but you have to pay the 20% in taxes. There should be a wealth tax. We could debate where the number should be, and maybe you do a graduated scale, a progressive tax system with the wealth tax, but like whether it's 2% or 5% or whatever, and you can't use loopholes below a certain point. So if you have a 5% wealth tax, you have to pay the 5%. And you can crack down on all the different ways of trying to avoid the wealth tax, which of course, you have an army of attorneys and experts trying to find loopholes for these people to keep paying no taxes. We can't afford to do that anymore. And also, this is an obvious point that very few people make. The extreme wealth by its very nature corrupts democracy. Because when you have billionaires and corporations who are so well-to-do that they have more power than some nation states, they can just buy the government and make the government pass legislation in their favor and screw over working people. And that's exactly what's happening right now. So obviously this needs to be paired with campaign finance reform and corruption reform. And I've always said, this is one of I think it's an unpopular position, but I don't know, maybe it is popular judging by the original response from what you guys said. I think you should punish corruption like it's murder. It should be really cracked down on. And I think the bar should be lowered where you don't just have to prove a quid pro quo, because quid pro quo is like, I will give you this money and you do that for me. And no, I think it's implied and not directly said in many instances, so don't tell me we can't get them if you connect the dots and the dots are connected, but you just don't have them verbally saying the agreement out loud. I think that's ridiculous. So, that's what you have to do. You need to do a wealth tax and you need to put an alternative minimum tax version of the wealth tax where they can't wiggle out of it. And, I don't know enough about Ron Wyden's billionaire tax, but maybe that's an idea as well, or maybe it's similar to a wealth tax. I'm not sure, but we can't keep going like this. This phenomenal wealth concentration at the top has so many deleterious effects that really destroy the fabric of society. Institutional trust is at a historic low right now, whether there's trust in the media, trust in the government, and it should be at a historic low because they're screwing you. And so one of the ways to help fix that system is to materially improve people's lives. And so if you tax the wealthy and if you redistribute that money in the form of, free college, eliminating student loan debt, UBI or whatever, universal health care, fill in the blank, well then, as I always tell you guys, when you improve people's material well-being, then other social ills drop around it. So I have no doubt that you'd have addiction drop, depression drop, anxiety drop, mental illness drop, bigotry and xenophobia drop. All these problems would still exist, but they would come down significantly because, people are struggling so mightily because they can't get their basic material needs met that it increases all societal ills. So it's good for everybody if you tax and redistribute. Redistribution of wealth is the duh position when you have something that's as lopsided as we have it now, because it most certainly is not a meritocracy. So you have to remember that. It's not like the harder these people work, the further they go. No. They've rigged the system. Some of them are lucky. Some of them are born into wealth. But either way, some of the hardest working people make next to no money. And so that's not a meritocracy. So tax and redistribute and give everybody a fair shot. And I'm telling you, it'll bring down all societal ills if you address this stuff substantively, and materially improve people's lives. Ever since Adpocalypse, when YouTube defunded all independent news and politics overnight, we haven't trusted them. We know they can pull the rug out from underneath us at any time. If you enjoy this content, please consider tipping $1 or $2 per month on the Secular Talk Patreon. Link in the video description box below. Thanks for your support.